Hi everyone, it's Kendall here, and what I have for you today is week number 16 in our continuing Brackman mystery series. This is week 28 if you're looking at it as a continuation of our original blocks, but it is week number 16 of our next lot of 18, so there's only 2 more to go, that we're doing for this current series. So without much further ado, let's get to it and spin the wheel! Brackman ID 1707 gives us another Nancy Cabot design called Practical Orchard. This was a design that from 1934 and appeared in a syndicated column which was written by Loretta Letner Rising for the Chicago Tribune. The Cabot column began in 1932 and continued throughout the decade. Patterns were reprinted in the 1960s and 70s by several small publishers, but are currently out of print again as far as Barbara knew at the time of researching. While this was the block that was spun up on our wheel, there are a few supplementary blocks available in the book that aren't on the wheel, as they have numbers like 1707A, 1707B. So what I did was look through other blocks that were based on this one. Because this is quite a simple 9 patch with just that hourglass in the middle, I thought some of the optional blocks, which are block 1685A, also called the Practical Orchard, but this one appeared in Ladies Art Company number 141, and as you can see, just has the solid corner squares replaced by half square triangles. And then we have 1685B, which is also called Practical Orchard, or Hourglass number 2, which was a Clara Stone design. Clara Stone's designs appeared in Practical Needlework Quilt Patterns, which was a C.W. Corkins & Co. publication from Boston, Massachusetts in 1906. This booklet was one of a series on needlework, and Stone had contributed patterns in the past to Hearth and Home, and this booklet included many that were published in that magazine. So as you can see, also the difference between 1685A and B is just the color placements and how you put the block together. So we are going to go with Clara's block, the Hourglass number 2, which is 1685B from Barbara's wonderful book, The Encyclopaedia of Pieced Quilt Patterns. Let's go. So with our fabric chosen and cut as per the cutting sheet, which you will find linked in the description box below and posted over at the Facebook group Kendall's Quilting Corner once this video first airs, you will notice that for A and C, I do have the little diagram that tells you to cut these twice on the diagonal, and we are using these to make the hourglass or the bow tie unit for the center of the block. We will only need to use half of these, but to get the quarter square triangles cut correctly so that you are left with a lengthwise or on grain on the edges, you do need to cut the larger square and cut it twice on the diagonal. However, for this video, I'm going to show you how we make those units 2 at a time, and it starts just like we do for a half square triangle. As you would have seen there, I drew a diagonal line on the wrong side of my light fabric, and I've matched that right sides together with my medium fabric. I'm going to take that to the machine and stitch 1/4 inch on each side of that drawn line. We're then going to give that a press first, just like I do with half square triangles, before slicing it in half on that drawn line. We're then going to press all of those to the darker of the 2 fabrics, and that is where we take a different step to half square triangles. We're now going to place these together just as if I was going to trim down with my 2 at a time method, making sure we have the opposite colours opposite each other. We're then going to make sure that that seam in the middle there is nice and snugly nested. We do need to draw another line on this now so that we can stitch once again at the machine. And to do that, find a reference line on your ruler and line that up with the stitching. The important thing here is that this line that you draw is 100% perpendicular to your stitching line at a 90-degree angle. It doesn't matter if you don't go directly corner to corner, as there's enough room here to trim these down. You'll also find it better to place it as you see me here, with that top seam allowance pointing up. That way, as you feed it through the machine on this initial row of stitching, which is a 1/4 inch away of that drawn line, it will help press those seam allowances together for a nice snug point in the middle of the block. We'll spin that around and once again stitch a 1/4 inch away on the other side of our drawn line. We'll then give this a press to ease any stretching caused by sewing across the bias and to settle those stitches into the fabric before once again cutting it in half on our drawn line. We can then discard one of these, as we only need one unit for the center of the block, so the other one can go into your parts center or your scrap bin for use in another project. We'll then press this by spinning our intersections, which I've covered in many other videos, or you can press to one side if that's your preference. We then need to trim this unit down to its final size of 4.5 inches. To get this trimmed down so that our 1/4 square triangle unit or hourglass or bow tie unit, whichever name you want to apply to it, is even, we need to find the 2 1/4 inch mark on our little ruler here, and that sits in the center of our pieces. We then make sure that our 45-degree line is going along the seam line of one part of our unit, and then you can just double check that you are right by noticing that the 4.5 inch mark is hitting the intersection of your seams at the top left-hand corner and the bottom right-hand corner before slicing away those first 2 sides. You then rotate that around and we can now place our 4.5 inch measurement on those freshly cut sides, making sure that our diagonal is still going across that middle seam. And you'll notice that the 2 1/4 inch mark automatically falls right in the center of your block. We can then just trim away the final 2 sides. There are a few more steps to this than when trimming half square triangles, but it is really simple. You just have to remember what half of your final trim down measurement is. So in our case, that was 2 1/4 inches. I'm now just going to quickly make the half square triangles that go in the corner of this unit, and that is just done the same way we do all of our half square triangles, using the 2 at a time method. We're going to draw a diagonal line on the wrong side of all of our light fabrics, match that up right sides together with our remaining medium fabrics, take that to the machine, stitch a 1/4 inch on each side of our drawn line. Give it a quick press first to set the stitching before cutting it in half on our drawn line, and then pressing it all towards the darker of the 2 fabrics. You can then trim these down to their final measurement of 4.5 inches unfinished, using whichever method you prefer. And for me, through this video, I'll be doing my 2 at a time method. We're now ready to set this block out for its final construction, and we need to refer back to our image that is on that cutting sheet to make sure that we have the correct orientation for our half square triangle units. I sort of futz around a bit with this before I am settled that it's correct, and I really had to think about it and try and find where I had my reference image when I was doing it. So keep that nice and handy. You will notice though that you will have the correct placement if your half square triangles and that center quarter square triangle unit do make those two arrows that are pointing towards each other. That is the look that we are going for in the final construction of this block. We then just need to bring in our solid 4.5 inch squares, which were from our dark fabric, and we're now ready to put this together with our 9-patch construction. We're going to start by sewing all of our vertical seams and then our horizontal seams. Once we do have those vertical seams sewn, we will press towards the solid square fabric as away from our pieced units, and that will allow for us to have proper nesting when we come to do our horizontal seams. Once we've done that first horizontal seam, we will spin the intersection because it can get a little bit bulky to press to one side. However, later on when I'm making the smaller version, I press to one side. So obviously it's whatever I feel on the day and at the time. As stated just before, we are going to spin the intersections once we've done this first horizontal row, and to do that we just pick out the few stitches that are on the outside of the seam that we just have sewn. You need to do this on both sides, so in 4 places, to just pull those stitches out, and that will enable us to easily open up that seam allowance and spin everything in the direction we want it to go. You will find that when you are piecing these 9-patch units and spinning the intersections, one side will spin clockwise and the other side will spin counterclockwise, and everything will sit nice and flat. So on the right hand side here, you can see that we're going anti-clockwise, and that seam just opened up, and we can see that a perfect mini version of our block appears in the middle. This left hand side one is going in a clockwise direction, and sometimes you might need to just pick out a few little stitches that are still caught in there. Once you have everything pressed into place nicely, you'll notice that those intersections are nice and flat. Now, it can be tricky to do this, but with practice, I'm sure that you'll get yours as perfect as I have on this side. We won't watch too closely what happens after I've sewn the next piece together. So with that done, we will attach our final row to this and do exactly the same process, and this block will be done. So as you can see, with a few simple units and colour placement that works for the fabric that you have, keeping in that light, medium and dark, our block for this week is done using our standard methods. You can make this block using your AccuQuilt, and as always, you should be working from the 8-inch mix and match cube, and you would need shapes 1, 3 and 4. 1 being the solid squares, 3 being the half square triangles for the corners, and 4 cutting the quarter square triangles to make that unit for the center. On the cutting sheet, it does have the numbers of each that you need. So for the quarter square triangles, for example, you really only need to cut 2 of each. I was just using some scrappy bits of fabric, so I sort of cut 4, but they're not complete. But just cut as many as you need, and then this block goes together in exactly the same way. Normally when I'm working with AccuQuilt, I do press all my seams open. For some reason today, I did that right up until the last step where I pressed to one side, which is weird because, as I said before, spinning that inner section does make it a little bit smoother. Please remember that when I'm using my AccuQuilt, I only have the 6.5 and 9.5 inch cubes, so I'm not able to make the 12-inch blocks, so mine are all finishing at 9 inches. As always, to see what this block looks like on repeat, here that is, and I think it creates quite an interesting secondary pattern where you get the diamonds made from the points of those half square triangles and the center part of that quarter square triangle. This would look amazing done in all different fabrics, remembering to keep with that light, medium and dark so that the parts of the pattern stand out that you want. You could also use some quite interesting feature fabrics for those solid squares, fussy cutting them to center a nice novelty print or whatever you like. You can just separate it with the sashing and cornerstones, and here is what that would look like. Nice and simple, no edges or seam allowances to intersect and nest up. Lastly, I just thought I'd show you what this one does look like on point, as I found it quite fascinating and is one of the reasons I picked this block over the other 2 versions for this week's tutorial. I really do like this on point, and I think that if you rotated every other block, you'd get another secondary pattern of a pinwheel with those edges of the half square triangles coming together on those points. Alrighty folks, another nice simple block, just that quarter square triangle for the middle and a bonus little one of those left over for you to use for another project. I hope you don't mind that I looked at some of the alternate piecings. I just noticed as I was spinning the wheel that some numbers weren't coming up with anything, and that's because in the book they had those letters after them. And so I thought, well, maybe I need to look at what those ones are. And for this week's block, I just liked the way it looked with those half square triangles, making that little point into the center. So I hope that's okay. If you've liked what you've seen today, I would love for you to like the video, share it with a friend that you think may be interested, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and most importantly, get your notifications on by tickling that little bell icon, and you won't miss a thing. I'll see you all again real soon. Bye for now.